y'all, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Stephanie and I appreciate y'all stopping by. In this video, I'm sharing with you 6 simple and fun patriotic decor DIYs that you can easily make to celebrate your love of this great country without breaking the bank. Get ready to get crafty and add a festive flair to your home with these creative ideas on a budget. Let's go ahead and dive in and get started on making your space a little more patriotic. Jumping right into project number 1. For this project, I used this plastic container from the Dollar Tree and used Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to give it a couple good coats. Once the paint was dry, I used some masking tape to tape off around the bottom edge of the container about the width of the masking tape, as well as some stripes around the outside of the container, using a piece of tape as a spacer between each stripe around the top. I then used Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson to paint the exposed stripes with 2 good coats, and once the paint was dry, removed the masking tape. Next, I used 10 of these vinyl stars that I had left over from a previous project that I cut out using my Cricut and placed them around the bottom edge of the container, trying to keep them spaced as evenly as possible. I also placed some thin washi tape around the container just above the stars, using the ends of the stripes as a guide, and then used Waverly chalk paint in the color Ocean to paint the bottom section of the container with 2 good coats. Once the paint was completely dry, I carefully removed each of the stars and the washi tape and touched up any areas of bleeding with the plaster colored chalk paint. I also used one of these decorative cake trays from the Dollar Tree and used Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson to give it 2 good coats on the top and the bottom. Then, to finish up this project, once all of the paint was completely dry, I applied some hot glue around the bottom rim of the container and set it down in the middle of the tray, and this whimsical patriotic hat is finished. Y'all, how cute did this turn out? I am absolutely in love with it, and it's hands down my favorite out of today's video. I decided to use it as a planter for some of these whimsical patriotic florals that I picked up at Walmart, but the possibilities are absolutely endless. These would be perfect to add to a fun tablescape for a 4th of July celebration. Quickly moving on to project number 2. For this project, I used 3 pieces of scrap wood that are roughly 2.5 inches wide and 3 3/4 inches tall, and started by rounding the edges using a finger sander. Next, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson to paint the first block, Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint the second block, and Waverly chalk paint in the color Ocean to paint the last block. Once the paint was dry, I used Waverly antique wax and a damp paper towel to lightly distress the crimson block, paying close attention to the edges, making them a little bit darker than the center. I then repeated this step to distress the other 2 blocks. I used a 1/4 inch drill bit to drill a hole on the side of the blue block, making sure to not go all the way through to the other side. Next, I used these 1.5 inch US and A wood letters from Hobby Lobby and used Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint the front of the letters U and A, and Waverly chalk paint in the color Ocean to paint the front of the letter S. I also used one of these 1/4 inch dowel rods from this package of assorted dowel rods that I picked up at Walmart. I cut 2 pieces, one at 3.5 inches long and one at 1.5 inches long. Next, I took this small wooden bead from Amazon and used a 1/4 inch drill bit to make the hole in the bead just big enough to fit the end of the dowel. Once I had the hole bigger, I placed it on the end of the 3.5 inch long dowel piece until the end was flush with the outside of the bead, using a hammer and light taps as needed. I then took a finger sander and sanded over the end to blend the end of the dowel rod to the outside of the bead for a nice finished look. After that was finished, I used Waverly antique wax to stain both pieces of the dowel rod. Next, I took one of these small wooden stars from a large pack that I picked up at Hobby Lobby and used Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson to paint the front and back. I took one of these medium eye hooks that I had in my stash and used a pair of pliers to open it up to create a hook, then used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink to paint it. I then took one of these patriotic bell ornaments that I got on sale at Hobby Lobby and used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink and a small paintbrush to make uneven lines down the sides of each of the red stripes to add a little more character to it. Once all the paint was dry, I used hot glue to attach the letter U to the blue block, the letter S to the white block, and the letter A to the red block. Next, I used hot glue to attach the blue block to the top of the white block and the red block to the right side of the white block. I then applied some hot glue to the flat end of the 3.5-inch dowel rod and placed it inside the hole on the side of the blue block, removing any excess glue. After the glue set up, I took the eye hook and screwed it into the bottom of the dowel rod in the center, making sure not to screw it so tight that it came out the top. Next, I applied some hot glue on one end of the 1.5-inch dowel rod and placed it onto the longer dowel rod just a little ways out from the edge of the blue block, then used hot glue to attach the wooden star to the top of it. Then, to finish up this project, I placed the bell on the eye hook and this one is finally finished. I know this one had a lot of steps, but it really was easy and fairly quick to make, and I absolutely love how it turned out. Though I'm a bit unsure about the star on the top, my son says leave it, but let me know what you think in the comments. On to project number 3. For this project, I used this wooden slat sign from the plus section at the Dollar Tree and started by using Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson to paint the top slat, Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint the second slat, and Waverly chalk paint in the color ocean to paint the last slat. Next, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color ink to paint the two pieces that are holding the slats together. I traced the words America, My Home Sweet Home from my computer in 2 different fonts onto some regular printer paper sized to fit each of the slats, then used a pencil to shade in the back side of each word to create a transfer. I used some Scotch tape to hold the word America in place on the top slat, then took a pen with a sharp tip and traced around each of the letters to transfer the word onto the sign. It's a bit hard to see on camera, but you can easily see it in person. I then repeated this step to transfer the words My Home onto the second slat and the words Sweet Home onto the last slat. Once I had all of the words transferred, I used this white metallic marker from the Dollar Tree to fill in the words on the first and the last slat, although you will see at the end that I did go back and water down some plaster chalk paint and go over them to make them stand out a bit more. Next, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson mixed with just a little bit of water to thin it out to fill in the words on the middle slat using a fine tip paintbrush. I then took 2 of these medium wooden stars from this pack that I picked up on sale at Hobby Lobby and used Waverly chalk paint in the color Ocean to paint them. Then, to finish up this project, I used hot glue to attach a star on each side of the words My Home on the middle slat, and that's it for this one. Like I said, I did go back and use plaster mixed with a little bit of water to fill in the words on the first and the last slat to make it all a little more uniformed. This one was super simple and minimal, but I think it turned out super cute, and for a little over $3, that's not too bad. For this project, I used these 3 USA blocks that I picked up in a pack from Walmart and started by using a heat tool and a spatula to gently remove the letters from each of the blocks and sanded them down so that I had blank slates. Next, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint all 3 blocks. I then used Waverly chalk paint in the color Ocean to paint the front of each of the letters. Once the paint was dry, I used hot glue to reattach each of the letters to the center of each of the blocks. I also used 2 of these 5x7 wooden rectangle plaques from Walmart and used Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint them both. Next, I used some masking tape to tape off the upper left corner of one of the plaques and then used Waverly chalk paint in the color Ocean to paint it with 2 good coats, and once the paint was dry, carefully removed the tape. I then used masking tape to tape off the edges of the blue section and then used washi tape to create the 13 stripes on the flag using an extra piece of the tape as a spacer. After I had the tape in place, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson to paint the exposed stripes with 2 good coats. Once the paint was dry, I removed the washi tape and cleaned up any bleeding with plaster chalk paint. I then repeated these steps to add the blue section and the red stripes to the other plaque. Next, I used 2 of these larger wooden stars from a variety pack that I picked up at Hobby Lobby and used Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to paint just the front of each star. Once the paint was dry, I used hot glue to attach one of the stars to the center of the blue section on one of the plaques. I then repeated this step to attach the other star to the other plaque. Next, I used some Waverly antique wax to stain the sides and back of both flags, as well as the sides of each of the blocks. Then, to finish up this project, I took 4 of the tumbling tower blocks from the Dollar Tree and painted them with Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster. Then, once the paint was dry, I used hot glue to attach 2 of the blocks together, stacking them one on top of the other. I then used hot glue to attach the set of blocks to the back of one of the flags, placing one on each side at the bottom. I also repeated this step with 4 more tumbling tower blocks, attaching them to the back of the second flag, and this one is finished. Y'all, this little shelf sitter set turned out so pretty. It is on the larger side, but that was actually my intention so that I could set it on the mantle over my kitchen archway. But you could definitely make a smaller version using smaller rectangle plaques and blocks. Next up, project number 5. For this project, I used this plastic half-barrel planter from the Dollar Tree and used Waverly chalk paint in the color plaster to give it 2 good coats. Next, I used Waverly chalk paint in the color ocean to paint the band around the top of the barrel. Then I used Waverly chalk paint in the color crimson to paint the bottom band and a little section of the barrel at the bottom. Once all of the paint was dry, I used a finger sander to heavily distress the entire barrel to bring some of the original brown color back through to make it look old and worn. Then, to finish up this quick little project, I placed some floral foam inside the planter, then used an assortment of greenery that I had in my stash, mostly from the Dollar Tree and scraps from previous projects, along with these red, white, and blue mums from the Dollar Tree, this red, white, and blue carnation bouquet from the Dollar Tree, and this red, white, and blue poppy bouquet from the Dollar Tree, as well as 2 of these red, white, and blue pom-pom picks from Walmart to create this gorgeous arrangement, and this one is finished. I know I said the first project was my personal favorite, but this one is a very close second. I can't wait to put this out on my covered porch as a centerpiece for my table. This is another piece that can be used for so many different things if you don't want to use it as a planter. And last but not least, project number 6. For this project, I used this large 11 by 14 inch wooden panel from the plus section at the Dollar Tree and started by using Waverly antique wax to stain the frame and the back. I also cut out these vinyl stars using my Cricut and placed them down in the center of the panel, and I will leave a link to this SVG in the description box below. Next, I took some Waverly chalk paint in the color ocean and added a tiny bit to some water to create a stain and used it to stain the panel around each of the stars, making sure to wipe off any excess. Once it was completely dry, I removed each of the vinyl stars. I also cut out this We the People in some matte black vinyl using my Cricut and placed it down in the center of the panel so that it was slightly tilted, and this one is finished. I will also leave a link to the We the People SVG in the description box as well. This one was super quick and super simple, but it turned out gorgeous. I love the rustic feel of the stains mixed with the raw wood stars and the black vinyl. It's going to make a wonderful addition to my mantle. And that's all I have today, y'all. Thank you for joining me on this patriotic DIY journey. I hope you enjoyed creating these festive decor pieces as much as I did. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more creative and budget-friendly DIY ideas. Also, be sure to stay tuned for more inspiration and happy crafting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.